The notification chime on the phone was the same as any other. A soft digital blip that usually meant a grocery store discount or a work email. But when Clara looked down at the screen while sitting in her small, sun-drenched home office, the text made her breath catch in her throat. It was a social media notification from a name she hadn't thought about in a decade. Jolene Vance. Jolene had been the undisputed son of Oak Ridge High. Everything revolved around her. And if you weren't in her light, you were in the dirt. Clara had spent 4 years in that dirt. The message was an invitation to the 10-year milestone gala. It wasn't just a casual get-together at a local bar. It was a black-tie event at the Grand Regency. Clara leaned back in her chair, her heart hammering a rhythm she thought she'd forgotten. In her mind, she wasn't the successful 30-year-old architectural designer she was today. For a split second, she was 17 again, wearing an oversized sweater to hide her frame, clutching a sketchbook like a shield, and trying to disappear into the lockers as Jolene and her circle laughed at the art freak, while Clara sat in the silence of her home. 300 miles away, a group chat was exploding. The name of the chat was the OG Royals. The messages were flying so fast the bubbles were overlapping. Jolene tapped out a message with manicured nails. "I sent it. Do you think the mouse will actually show up?" The reply came instantly from Toby, a man who still wore his varsity jacket in his social media profile picture. "She has to. I told the committee to send her a special recognition teaser. We told her she's being honored for her unique journey. She's so desperate for validation. She'll be there in her best thrift store rags." "I have the folder ready," another girl, Becca, chimed in. "I've been saving those old videos from junior year. The one where she tripped in the cafeteria? I've upscaled it. It's going to look great on the 20-foot projector screen." The plan was as simple as it was cruel. They didn't just want a reunion. They wanted a reenactment. They wanted to see if they still had the power to make someone feel like nothing. To them, life hadn't really progressed past the school gym. They had stayed in their hometown, worked at their parents' firms, and kept the same hierarchy alive. Clara was the only one who had truly vanished, disappearing into the city and cutting ties with everyone. To them, her silence wasn't a sign of success. It was a sign of shame. They assumed she was still the same broken girl, and they wanted one last laugh before they officially hit their 30s. Back in her office, Clara stood up and walked to a floor-to-ceiling mirror. She didn't see the girl in the oversized sweater anymore. She saw a woman who had spent 10 years building a life from scratch. She had worked 3 jobs to put herself through design school. She had dealt with demanding clients and navigated the cutthroat world of urban development. She looked at the invitation again. Her finger hovered over the decline button. That was the safe choice. The easy choice. But then she thought about the girl who used to cry in the library stalls. That girl deserved an apology that she was never going to get. Or perhaps she deserved something better. She deserved to see that the world was much bigger than the shadows Jolene Vance. Clara picked up her phone and dialed a number she hadn't called in months. "Hey, it's me," Clara said when the voice answered. "I need a favor. You know that custom piece we were talking about for the gala next month? The one with the hand-sewn silk and the structured shoulders? I need it finished early. And I need it to look like armor." Over the next few weeks, the group chat of the Royals became a breeding ground for anticipation. They spent hours discussing the logistics of the Legacy Award. It even convinced the reunion treasurer to let them handle the entertainment portion of the night. It's about tradition. Toby had argued to the committee. "We want to show where we started versus where we are now. It's inspirational." Their private messages told a different story. They were bored. Their lives were stagnant, and the only way they knew how to feel big was to make someone else feel small. They reminisced about the good old days, which were really just days of unchecked bullying. They joked about Clara's old stutter, her messy hair, and her old habit of sketching in the back of the room. They had no idea that those sketches had turned into blueprints for some of the most beautiful buildings in the state. As the date approached, Clara began her own preparations. It wasn't about revenge, not exactly. It was about a final closing of a door. She went to the gym, she worked her long hours, and she coordinated with a few old contacts She still had people who hadn't been in the inner circle, but had seen the truth of what happened in those halls. One of them was a guy named Simon, who now ran a high-end audiovisual company. When Clara reached out to him, Simon was quiet for a long time. "You know they're planning something, right?" Simon asked over the phone, his voice hushed. "I saw the file Toby uploaded to the server for the presentation." "Clara, it's mean. It's really mean. It's stuff from when we were 15. Clara felt a cold chill, but she didn't let her voice shake. "I figured as much. Can you do me a favor, Simon? Can you give me access to that server? Just for 10 minutes. They'll kill me if they find out," Simon whispered. "They won't find out," Clara promised. "I just want to make sure the inspiration is accurate." The week of the reunion arrived. The town of Oak Ridge was buzzing. The local hotel was booked solid. Jolene had spent thousands on her dress, determined to prove she was still the queen. She sat in the salon, getting her hair done, scrolling through the guest list. Clara confirmed. Jolene texted the group. "The trap is set. I can't wait to see her face when the legacy starts playing. I hope she wears that awful denim jacket she used to live in." Clara, meanwhile, was miles away, finishing a meeting with a group of investors. She was calm. She was focused. As she packed her leather briefcase, she looked at the garment bag hanging on her office door. Inside was a dress that cost more than her first car, a sharp, midnight blue masterpiece that was both elegant and intimidating. She wasn't the mouse anymore, and the lions were about to find out they were actually just house cats. The sun began to set over the rolling hills of Oak Ridge, casting long, golden shadows across the parking lot of the Grand Regency Hotel. This was the night everyone had been talking about for months. The gravel crunched under the tires of expensive SUVs and polished sedans as the former students of Oak Ridge High arrived. Dressed in their finest clothes, carrying the weight of a decade's worth of expectations on their shoulders. Inside the lobby, the air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the nervous energy of people trying to prove they had made something of themselves. In a suite on the 4th floor, Jolene was finishing her makeup. She stared at her reflection, adjusting the strap of her sparkling gold dress. She looked exactly like the woman she had promised herself she would become, polished, wealthy, and in control. To her right, Becca was sipping a glass of chilled juice, looking through her phone. They were laughing, but it wasn't the kind of laughter that comes from joy. It was the sharp, jagged laughter of people who felt powerful because they were about to hurt someone. "Did you see the car Toby pulled up in?" Becca asked, checking her lipstick. "He's so proud of that lease. He thinks he's the king of the world because he sells insurance to his dad's friends. But tonight isn't about him. It's about the show." Jolene smiled, a cold, thin line. "I just want to see the moment the lights go down. I want to see Clara's face when she realizes that no matter how many years pass, she's still just the girl we used to call the ghost. She thinks she's coming here to be honored. She probably spent her last paycheck on some polyester dress from a mall outlet." They headed down to the ballroom, where the party was already in full swing. The room was decorated in silver and navy blue. A large stage sat at the far end, dominated by a massive digital screen that currently showed a rotating logo of the school mascot. People were huddled in groups, clutching drinks and trading stories about their jobs, their kids, and their houses. But the main topic of conversation was the special guest the committee had teased. Toby was by the bar, holding court. He was louder than anyone else, his face slightly flushed. He kept checking the entrance, waiting for the punchline to his decade-long joke to walk through the doors. He had the remote for the presentation tucked into his blazer pocket like a weapon. Every time someone asked him who the special award was for, he would just wink and say, "Someone who really left a mark on us." While the royals were busy congratulating themselves, a sleek matte black sedan pulled up to the valet stand. It didn't have a loud engine, but it had a presence that made people turn their heads. The valet opened the door, and a pair of high-heeled shoes hit the pavement. They weren't just any shoes. They were the kind that looked like they belonged on a runway in Milan. Clara stepped out of the car. She took a deep breath of the cool night air. Her heart was steady. For years, she had dreamt of this moment, but in her dreams, she was always angry. Tonight, she felt something different. She felt a strange kind of peace, She was wearing the midnight blue dress she had commissioned. It fit her like a second skin, structured at the shoulders with a flowing skirt that moved like liquid when she walked. Her hair, once messy and unkempt, was styled in a sleek modern wave. She didn't wear much jewelry, just a pair of simple diamond studs, and a watch that cost more than most of the cars in the parking lot. She walked through the lobby, her heels clicking rhythmically on the marble floor. People she didn't recognize stared at her as she passed. They didn't see the ghost. They saw a woman of immense power and quiet grace. As she reached the heavy oak doors of the ballroom, she paused. She could hear the muffled sound of music and the roar of 100 voices talking at once. She knew that the moment she stepped through those doors, the trap would be set. She knew about the video. She knew about the group chat. She knew they were waiting to laugh. She straightened her posture, pushed the doors open, and walked in. The change in the room was almost instantaneous. It started near the door and spread like a wave. The talking died down. Heads turned. People nudged their partners, pointing toward the entrance. Jolene, who was standing near the stage, frowned. She saw a woman walking toward the center of the room, but she didn't recognize her at first. She saw the dress, the confidence, the way the light caught the woman's eyes. It wasn't until the woman got closer, passing under the main chandelier, that Jolene's glass nearly slipped from her hand. "No way," Becca whispered, her eyes wide. Is that Clara?" Toby stopped mid-sentence. He stared at the woman walking toward them. She didn't look nervous. She didn't look like she was searching for a place to hide. She was walking right into the center of the lion's den with a small, light smile on her face. Clara stopped a few feet away from the main group. She looked at Jolene, then at Becca, then at Toby. She didn't look away first. She held their gaze with a terrifyingly calm intensity. "Hi, Jolene," Clara said. Her voice was different, too. It wasn't the high-pitched, shaky whisper of a girl who was afraid to speak. It was low, resonant, and perfectly controlled. "It's been a long time. You look exactly the same." The way she said it wasn't a compliment. It sounded like she was observing a fossil in a museum. Jolene scrambled to regain her footing. She forced a bright, fake smile. "Clara, oh my God, look at you. We were just talking about you. We weren't sure you'd make it. You look so different." "Growth tends to do that," Clara replied simply. Toby stepped forward, trying to regain his role as the leader of the group. "Hey, Clara, long time no see. Glad you could make it. We've got a big night planned. You're actually our guest of honor. We're giving out a special legacy award later. We thought it was important to recognize the people who really defined our high school experience." He was smirking, but Clara noticed that his hand was shaking slightly as he reached into his pocket to touch the remote. He was intimidated, and he was using his prank as a shield to hide his insecurity. "I heard about the award," Clara said, her eyes drifting to the large screen behind them. "It's very thoughtful of you all to spend so much time thinking about the past. Most people find it hard to move on, I suppose." The insult was subtle, but it landed. The people standing nearby, former classmates who hadn't been part of the inner circle, started whispering. They could see the tension. They could see that the girl they remembered as a victim was now the most imposing person in the room for the next hour. Clara moved through the room like a ghost of a different kind. She spoke to the people who had been kind to her, the ones who had been invisible like she was. She listened to their stories about their lives, their struggles, and their small victories. She was genuinely interested. Meanwhile, Jolene and her group were huddled in the corner, their faces twisted in frustration. Their prank felt smaller now. "It's hard to bully someone who looks like they own the building you're standing in. We have to do it," Becca hissed. "Look at her. She thinks she's better than us. We need to remind everyone who she really is. The video will do it. Once people see her crying over that ruined sketchbook in the hallway, all this boss lady energy will disappear." She crumbled. Jolene nodded, her eyes fixed on Clara, who was currently laughing at a joke made by a former librarian. "You're right. Let's get the committee chair. It's time to start the presentation. Let's see how she likes the spotlight when it's showing the truth." As the royals moved toward the stage to signal the start of the ceremony, Clara caught the eye of Simon, the AV technician, who was sitting in the back behind a soundboard. He gave her a very small, almost invisible nod. Clara took a sip of her water and leaned against a pillar. The trap was about to be sprung, but as she looked at the arrogant, desperate faces of her former bullies, she realized they had no idea that she wasn't the one walking into a cage. They were. The lights in the ballroom began to dim. A hush fell over the crowd. Toby walked up to the microphone, his chest puffed out, a cruel glint in his eyes. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice booming through the speakers, "if everyone could please take their seats, we have a very special presentation for a very special member of the class of 2014. Clara stood perfectly still in the darkness, a shadow among shadows, waiting for the tables to turn. The ballroom went nearly pitch black, save for the faint glow of the exit signs and the shimmering white light of the massive projector screen at the front of the hall. The air felt heavy, charged with a mixture of curiosity and a strange, lingering tension that had been building since Clara walked through the doors. The royals were positioned near the front, their faces illuminated by the reflected light of the screen. They looked like statues of hunters waiting for their prey to realize the trap had been sprung. Toby stood at the podium, gripping the edges of the wood. He cleared his throat, the sound echoing through the high-quality speakers. "You know," he began, his voice dripping with a fake, sugary sincerity, "high school is a journey. For some of us, it was a time of glory. For others, it was a time of ... struggle. But tonight, we wanted to highlight one specific journey. A journey of transformation. We call this the Legacy Award, and it goes to someone who we all remember very vividly. Clara, why don't you come up here and take a seat of honor?" A spotlight cut through the darkness, swinging wildly for a moment before landing directly on Clara. She didn't flinch. She didn't squint against the brightness. She simply stepped forward, her midnight blue dress shimmering like a star in the night sky. The crowd watched in total silence as she walked toward the stage. Each step was deliberate. She wasn't scurrying. She was ascending. She took the seat Toby pointed to, a lone chair positioned right next to the screen, facing the audience. "Now," Jolene said, stepping up to join Toby at the mic, a cruel smirk playing on her lips. "Before we give Clara her trophy, we thought we'd take a little trip down memory lane. We dug through the archives, found some old footage, and put together a little tribute. Let's roll it." Jolene looked at the back of the room and gave a sharp nod to the AV booth. She was expecting the screen to erupt with the embarrassing videos they had spent weeks editing, the time someone had dumped a tray of food on Clara, the time she had been caught crying in the stairwell, and the various clips of her looking awkward and out of place. The screen flickered. A low hum filled the room. The first image appeared. It wasn't the grainy, shaky cell phone footage of a cafeteria floor. Instead, it was a crisp, high-definition broadcast logo of a major national news network. The title on the screen read, "The Architects of Tomorrow: How One Woman is Reimagining Our Cities." The room went from silent to breathless. A professional news anchor appeared on the screen. "Tonight, we sit down with the visionary founder of Slate and Stone Developments. At just 29, she has become the youngest person to win the International Urban Design Prize. Her work isn't just about buildings. It's about community, resilience, and building a future where no one is left behind." The video cut to a montage of stunning architectural wonders, skyscrapers with vertical gardens, sleek community centers, and a massive housing project for the underprivileged that looked like a work of art. And there, in the center of the footage, was Clara. She was wearing a hard hat in some shots, pointing at blueprints in others, and shaking hands with world leaders in the rest. The royals froze. Toby's hand, still hovering near the remote in his pocket, went limp. Jolene's mouth actually hung open, her carefully applied lipstick looking garish under the stage lights. This wasn't the script. This wasn't the mouse they had come to drown. The video continued, but the audio changed. It shifted from the news report to a more personal recording. It was a voice memo, played over a series of screenshots. The screenshots were of the private group chat, the OG Royals. The audience gasped as they saw the messages Toby, Jolene, and Becca had sent over the last month. The words were laid bare for everyone to see. Let's make her cry one last time. Can't wait to see her in her thrift store rags. She's still just a loser. No matter where she lives now, the contrast was devastating. On one side of the screen, they saw a woman changing the world. On the other, they saw the petty, ugly words of people who had never left their hometown. The legacy wasn't about Clara's embarrassment. It was about the bully's true nature. The footage then shifted to a legal document, a corporate filing that had been highlighted in bright yellow. It showed the recent acquisition of Oak Ridge Realty and Insurance, the very company where Toby worked and where Jolene's father was a senior partner. The buyer listed at the bottom of the document in bold letters was a subsidiary of Slate and Stone Developments. Clara owned them. The room was so quiet you could hear the hum of the air conditioning. The power dynamic hadn't just shifted. It had been demolished and rebuilt in a matter of minutes. The people in the audience, many of whom had felt the sting of Jolene's attitude over the years, began to murmur. The murmurs turned into a low roar of realization. Clara stood up from her chair. She didn't wait for Toby to give her the microphone. She simply walked over and took it from his hand. He didn't even try to hold on to it. He looked like he wanted the floor to open up and swallow him whole. She looked out at the crowd, her face calm and unreadable. She didn't look like she was enjoying their pain, but she didn't look sorry either. She looked like an adult looking at a group of children who had finally broken a toy they couldn't afford to fix. I want to thank the committee for this. Tribute, Clara said, her voice steady and clear. It's interesting to see what people choose to remember. Some people remember the pain they caused. Others remember the strength they had to build because of it. I came here tonight wondering if any of you had changed. I wondered if 10 years was enough time for a person to grow a heart, or at least a sense of decency. She turned to look at Jolene, who was trembling, her face a pale mask of shock. It's a shame. Really, Clara continued. I had a plan to invest back into this town. I wanted to build something here that mattered. But as I look around this stage, I realize that some foundations are too cracked to build upon. You spent your time planning a prank. I spent mine building a legacy. I think the screen shows who really won. Clara set the microphone down on the podium. The sound of it hitting the wood was like a gavel finishing a trial. She didn't stay to hear the applause, and she didn't stay to hear the excuses. She turned her back on the royals, walked down the stairs, and headed toward the exit. As she passed Simon at the AV booth, she didn't stop, but she'd catch his eye. He gave her a thumbs up, a small smile on his face. He had done his job perfectly. He had swapped the files just in time. The heavy oak doors of the ballroom swung open for her one last time. As she walked out into the cool night air, the sound of the ballroom erupted behind her, not with laughter, but with the sound of 100 people finally seeing the truth. The silence that followed Clara's exit was the loudest thing the Grand Regency Hotel had ever hosted. In the ballroom, the air felt like it had been sucked out of the room. The projector was still glowing, the bright yellow highlights on the acquisition papers casting a sickly light over Toby and Jolene's faces. They stood on the stage, stripped bare of their arrogance, while the people they had looked down on for a decade watched them with a mix of pity and disgust. Jolene was the first to move. She grabbed the edge of the podium, her knuckles white. She looked out at the sea of faces, hoping to find one person who was on her side. One person who would laugh with her and tell her it was just a joke. But even Becca had stepped back, putting distance between herself and the fallout. The people in the front row, the ones who usually laughed at Jolene's mean comments, just to stay in her good graces, were now looking at their laps, or whispered to their spouses. Wait. Toby finally shouted into the microphone, his voice cracking and high-pitched. It's not what it looks like. That video. That's private property. That's a breach of privacy. A man stood up from the back of the room. It was Mr. Harrison, their old history teacher, who had come to the reunion to see how his students had grown. He looked at Toby with a look of profound disappointment. The only thing I see breached here, Toby, is the dignity of this class. You spent your energy trying to hurt someone who clearly moved far beyond this town. It's pathetic. A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. The royals weren't royals anymore. They were just adults who had been caught acting like children. Jolene finally found her voice, though it was shaking. She thinks she's so great? She thinks she can just come here and buy us? My father will have something to say about that. He's the one who runs the firm. Actually, a voice called out from the side of the stage. It was the reunion treasurer, a woman named Linda, who had always been quiet and observant. Clara's company finalized the paperwork yesterday. Your father isn't the one running things anymore, Jolene. He's an employee. And based on what we just saw on that screen, I'd say his job security is looking pretty thin. Jolene felt a wave of nausea. The reality of the situation was starting to sink in. This wasn't just about a ruined party. This was about their lives. They had lived in a bubble where they were the center of the universe, and Clara had just popped it with a single, elegant needle. Outside, the night air was crisp and smelled of rain. Clara stood by her car, but she didn't get in immediately. She leaned against the door, taking a long, deep breath. Her hands weren't shaking. She didn't feel the rush of adrenaline she expected. Instead, she felt a profound sense of lightness. It was as if a heavy coat she had been wearing for 10 years had finally been dropped on the floor. A shadow moved near the hotel entrance. It was Simon. He was carrying his laptop bag and a coil of cables. He walked over to her, his face lit by the dim amber lights of the parking lot. That was something, Simon said, his voice quiet. I've never seen a room turn that fast. You okay? Clara looked at him and smiled. It was a real smile, not the practiced one she used in boardrooms. I'm better than okay, Simon, thank you. I know you took a risk doing that. Simon shrugged, though he looked pleased. I didn't like them then, and I don't like them now. People like that think the world stays the same forever. They think they can keep people in boxes. I just helped you open the lid. What are they doing in there? She asked, arguing. Simon chuckled. Toby is trying to blame the AV team. Jolene is crying, and everyone else is leaving. Most people are headed to the diner down the road. They don't want to be part of whatever disaster is happening on that stage. As they spoke, the ballroom doors swung open again. A group of former classmates came out, looking rejuvenated. They saw Clara and stopped. For a moment, she expected them to be cold, but a woman she remembered from her biology class stepped forward. Clara, the woman said, looking nervous but determined. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. I saw what they did to you back then. I didn't say anything because I didn't want to be the next target. But seeing you tonight, seeing how you handled that, it was amazing. You didn't just stand up for yourself. You showed us what it looks like to actually grow up. One by one, the others nodded. They weren't there to ask for jobs or favors. They were there to offer the acknowledgement they had been too afraid to give 10 years ago. Clara felt a lump in her throat. This was the part she hadn't planned for. She had planned for the victory, but she hadn't planned for the reconciliation. Thank you, Clara said softly. It means a lot, truly. The group moved on, leaving her in the quiet of the lot. But the peace was interrupted by the sound of clicking heels and heavy breathing. Jolene had burst through the hotel doors, her gold dress fluttering in the wind. Toby followed close behind, looking frantic. You, Jolene screamed, pointing a finger at Clara. You think you're so smart? You think you can just ruin my life and walk away? Clara didn't move. She didn't even stand up straight. She just looked at Jolene with a calm that was more intimidating than anger. I didn't ruin your life, Jolene. I just showed everyone what you chose to do with it. You had 10 years to become anyone you wanted to be. You chose to be the person who makes mean videos in a group chat. You're going to pay for this? Toby spat, stepping toward Clara. My father has lawyers. We'll sue you for defamation. We'll take everything you built. Clara finally stood up, her height and her posture making Toby stop in his tracks. Toby, I wouldn't do that if I were you. If you go to court, that video becomes public record. Every future employer, every client, and every neighbor you ever have will see exactly who you are. And as for taking everything I built, I own the firm that holds your mortgage. If you want to talk about lawyers, we can. But I promise you mine are much better than yours. Toby's face went from red to a ghostly white. The The realization that he was standing in front of the person who quite literally held his future in her hands finally hit him. He looked at his shoes, the fire in his eyes dying out instantly. Jolene looked at her friend, then back at Clara. She looked small. For the first time in her life, she didn't have a crowd to cheer her on. She didn't have a crown. She was just a woman in an expensive dress, standing in a parking lot, facing the consequences of her own heart. "What do you want?" Jolene whispered, her voice cracking. Clara looked at her for a long time. She thought about all the nights she had stayed up crying. She thought about the sketchbook they had ruined. She thought about the girl who felt like she didn't belong in the world. "I don't want anything from you," Clara said. "I already have everything I need. I just wanted you to know that the world is much bigger than Oak Ridge High, and you are much smaller than you think." Clara got into her car. She didn't look back as she started the engine. As she drove toward the exit, she saw the lights of the hotel in her rearview mirror. They looked dim and far away. Inside the hotel, the party was over. The staff were already beginning to clear the tables, folding the navy blue cloths and stacking the chairs. The Legacy Award trophy was sitting on the floor near the stage, forgotten and unclaimed. The screen was dark. As Clara reached the highway, she felt a sense of finality. The chapter wasn't just closed. It was finished. She had faced her monsters and found out they were just shadows. She put on some music, the sound filling the car, and headed back toward the city, back to the life she had built and the future that was finally, truly her own. 6 months had passed since the night of the 10-year reunion, and the town of Oak Ridge was finally beginning to settle into a new kind of normal. The gossip that had fueled the local coffee shops and grocery store aisles for weeks had finally started to fade. But the impact of that night remained etched into the lives of everyone who had been in that ballroom. Clara sat in her high-rise office in the city, the floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view of a skyline she had helped shape. On her desk sat a small, framed photo that hadn't been there before. It wasn't a photo of a building or an award ceremony. It was a candid shot taken at a local park in Oak Ridge, showing a group of teenagers sitting around a table, sketching after the reunion. Clara hadn't just disappeared back into her wealthy life. She had returned to her hometown, but not for revenge. She had returned to fulfill the promise she made during her speech, the promise to invest in a community that was ready to grow. She had purchased an old, abandoned textile mill on the edge of town. Instead of turning it into luxury condos that the locals couldn't afford, she had transformed it into the Oak Ridge Arts and Innovation Center. It was a place where kids who felt like outsiders, much like she once did, could go to learn design, coding, and traditional art. She had hired Simon to run the technology wing, giving him the resources to build the best AV and digital media lab in the state. For Clara, this was the true victory. It wasn't about owning the companies that employed her bullies. It was about building something that ensured the next generation wouldn't have to deal with people like them. Back in the heart of Oak Ridge, the Royals were living a very different reality. The fall from grace had been swift and public. Toby had tried to stay at the insurance firm, but the atmosphere had become unbearable. Every time he walked into a meeting, he felt the eyes of his colleagues on him, wondering if he was the same man who had been exposed on that big screen. Eventually, under the new management of Clara's subsidiary, his performance was reviewed with a scrutiny he had never faced when his father's friend ran the place. He was eventually let go, not out of spite, but because he simply wasn't good at a job he had been handed through nepotism. He was now working as a junior clerk in a neighboring county, where nobody knew his name or his high school stats. Jolene's path had been even more difficult. The social standing she had built her entire identity upon had evaporated. The friends who had followed her for years moved on to find a new center of gravity. Her father's firm survived, but his reputation had taken a hit, and the family's influence over the town's social calendar was gone. Jolene spent a lot of time at home, looking at her old photos. But one day she did something unexpected. She visited the new Innovation Center. She didn't go inside, but she stood across the street, watching the kids walk in with their sketchbooks and laptops, looking happy and safe. For the first time in her life, she felt the weight of what she had tried to take away from people. It wasn't an apology. But it was the beginning of an awareness she had lacked for 30 years. Becca had been the only one of the trio to reach out. She had sent Clara a long handwritten letter for months after the reunion. It wasn't full of excuses. It was an admission that she had been a follower because she was afraid of being a target. She didn't ask for a job or for forgiveness. She just wanted Clara to know that she had started seeing a therapist to understand why she felt the need to hurt others to feel important. Clara hadn't replied, but she had kept the letter. It was a sign that even the most hardened social structures could break if you applied enough light to them. One Saturday afternoon, Clara decided to visit the Innovation Center unannounced. She wore jeans and a simple sweater, looking more like the girl from high school than the CEO from the city. She walked through the halls, listening to the sound of children laughing and the hum of 3D printers. She found herself in the gallery wing. Where the walls were covered in student art, she stopped in front of a charcoal drawing of a bridge. It was technical, but soulful. "I want to be an architect," a voice said from behind her. Clara turned to see a young girl, perhaps 14, with messy hair and paint-stained fingers. The girl looked nervous, holding a sketchbook to her chest like a shield. "That's a beautiful goal," Clara said, smiling warmly. "The world always needs more people who know how to build things that last. Do you think it's hard?" The girl asked. "People at school say it's too much work for someone like me." Clara knelt down, so she was eye level with the girl. She saw the same flicker of doubt she had carried for so long. "It is hard work," Clara told her. "But the hardest part isn't the math or the drawing. The hardest part is believing that your voice matters even when people try to quiet it. Don't let anyone tell you who you are. You're the one holding the pencil." The girl nodded, a small but certain smile spreading across her face. She walked back to her desk, her posture a little straighter. Clara walked out of the center and stood on the sidewalk. She looked up at the old textile mill, now vibrant and full of life. She thought about the reunion, the dress, the video, and the look on Toby and Jolene's faces. All of that felt like a lifetime ago. It was a necessary bridge to get to where she was now. But she didn't need to cross it anymore. The tables hadn't just been turned. The entire game had changed. The girl who had been pushed into the lockers was now the woman who built the doors. She walked to her car, feeling the warmth of the sun on her face. She had no more ghosts to face and no more points to prove. As she drove out of Oak Ridge, she didn't look in the rearview mirror this time. She didn't need to see what was behind her. She was looking straight ahead at the road, at the horizon, and at all the things she had yet to build. The story of the bullied girl was over. The story of the woman who changed her world was just beginning. A year had passed since the grand opening of the Innovation Center, and the ripple effects of that one night at the Grand Regency Hotel were still spreading through the streets of Oak Ridge like a quiet, steady tide. Life in a small town usually moves slowly, but for the people involved in Clara's story, the world had shifted on its axis. It was a Tuesday morning, the kind where the air is crisp and the town smells of damp earth and fresh coffee. Clara was back in town, but not for a gala or a confrontation. She was sitting in a small local bakery that had recently opened across from the old high school. She wasn't wearing her midnight blue designer dress or her expensive watch. She was in a simple trench coat and boots, holding a warm mug between her hands. She liked coming here because for the first time in her life, she felt like she belonged in Oak Ridge, not as a victim and not even as a celebrity, but as a neighbor. The door to the bakery creaked open and a woman walked in. She was wearing a simple uniform for a local florist shop, her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. It was Becca. She didn't see Clara at first. She went straight to the counter to pick up an order of cupcakes for a wedding. Clara watched her. There was a softness in Becca's face that hadn't been there 10 years ago. The sharp, judgmental edge that used to define her expression had been replaced by something that looked like exhaustion. When Becca turned around with her box of cupcakes, her eyes met Clara's. The air in the small bakery seemed to freeze. In the past, this moment would have been filled with a biting remark or a hurried escape. But today, Becca didn't run. She stood still for a long moment, then she walked over to Clara's table. "I didn't think I'd see you here today," Becca said, her voice quiet. "Yeah, I like the coffee here," Clara replied, gesturing to the empty chair across from her. "Do you have a minute?" Becca looked at the clock on the wall, then sat down. "I got your letter," Clara said, referring to the apology Becca had sent months ago. "I never wrote back because I wasn't sure what to say, but I wanted you to know I read it." Becca looked down at her hands. "I meant what I said. I spent so many years trying to be someone I wasn't because I was terrified of being the one left out. I watched what we did to you, and even then, I knew it was wrong. But I was a coward. I've spent the last year trying to figure out how to stop being a coward. It's a long process," Clara said gently, "but you're doing it." "I heard you're working with the local youth mentorship program now," Becca nodded. "I try to talk to the girls who feel like they have to be mean to survive. I tell them it's not worth it. I tell them about that night at the reunion. I use myself as an example of what happens when you let your ego run your life. Most of them listen. Some don't, but I have to try." They talked for 20 minutes not about the past, but about the present. Becca told her about the town's changing atmosphere. The Royals were no longer the topic of conversation. The town was buzzing about the new jobs at the Innovation Center and the scholarship programs Clara had started. The power had shifted from those who tore things down to those who built things up. When Becca left, Clara felt a final sense of closure. The bully wasn't a monster anymore. She was just a person trying to do better. And that, in many ways, was a bigger victory than the corporate acquisition. Clara spent the rest of the day at the Innovation Center. She spent time in the library wing, which had become a sanctuary for students. She noticed a new plaque on the wall, one she hadn't authorized. It was a simple bronze square that read, "For the ones who draw in the dark. The light is coming." She asked Simon about it later that afternoon. He was in the server room surrounded by humming machines and blue, glowing lights. "Oh, that," Simon laughed, wiping a smudge of grease from his forehead. The students pooled their lunch money together to buy that. They wanted to thank the person who gave them a place to be themselves. "I told them you wouldn't want the attention, but they insisted." Clara felt a warmth in her chest that no business success could ever provide. "It's perfect, Simon. Thank you." "By the way," Simon said, his tone shifting to something more serious, "I saw Toby last week. He's working at the hardware store over in the next county. He looked ... different. He didn't try to brag. He didn't even look me in the eye. He just sold me a bag of mulch and told me to have a nice day. Do you think he's learned?" Clara asked. "Yes. I think he's learned that the world doesn't owe him anything," Simon said. "And for a guy like him, that's the hardest lesson there is. He's not a king anymore. He's just a guy with a job. And maybe, eventually, he'll be a good guy with a job." As evening fell, Clara drove to the highest point in town, a hill that overlooked the valley. From up here, Oak Ridge looked like a jewelry box of twinkling lights. She could see the Grand Regency Hotel in the distance, but it didn't look intimidating anymore. It just looked like a building. She thought about the journey from the girl in the oversized sweater to the woman standing on this hill. For a long time, she thought the tables turning meant making her enemies feel the pain she had felt. But as she looked at the town she was helping to heal, she realized that true victory wasn't about making them feel small. It was about making herself and everyone else feel big enough that the bullies didn't matter anymore. She pulled out her phone and sent a message to her team in the city. "I'm staying another week. There's a new project I want to start. We're going to build a public park where the old downtown parking lot is. I want trees, benches, and a place for people to sit and talk. No walls, no gates, just space." Clara leaned against her car, watching the stars come out. She was no longer defined by what had been done to her. She was defined by what she was doing for others. The cruel prank of the past had become the fuel for a beautiful future. The tables hadn't just been turned. They had been cleared, and a new feast had been set. One where everyone was invited, and no one had to be afraid. Clara smiled, took a breath of the sweet Oak Ridge air. And for the first time in her life, she felt completely, perfectly at home. The seasons in Oak Ridge had a way of marking time more clearly than any calendar. 2 years had passed since the night of the reunion, and the town was currently wrapped in the quiet white blanket of a heavy winter. Snow sat thick on the branches of the oak trees that gave the town its name, and the windows of the Innovation Center glowed with a warm, inviting amber light against the blue dusk. Clara stood by the window of the center's top floor, watching the snowflakes drift down. She wasn't there to check on the construction of the new park or to handle a business merger. She was there for the winter showcase, an event where the townspeople gathered to see what the local kids and adults had been creating in the workshops. The building was buzzing. The smell of cinnamon and pine filled the air. Downstairs, a local choir was practicing, their voices rising through the vents in a soft harmony. Clara felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned to see a woman she had seen many times over the last year. Someone who had once been a peripheral figure in Jolene's circle, but who was now one of the lead volunteers at the center. "The guest list is full." "Clara," the woman said, her voice filled with excitement. "Even people from the next 2 towns over are coming. They want to see the Oak Ridge miracle." Clara smiled. "It's not a miracle. It's just what happens when you give people a place to belong." As the evening began, the doors opened and the town poured in. It wasn't the cold, judgmental crowd of the Grand Regency. These were families in heavy coats and boots, children with rosy cheeks, and elderly couples holding hands. Among the crowd, Clara spotted a few familiar faces in the corner of the gallery. She saw a man looking intently at a display of 3D printed gears. It was Toby. He looked different. His hair was a bit longer, and he was wearing a simple work jacket from the hardware store. He wasn't loud, and he wasn't trying to be the center of attention. He was just a man looking at art. When he saw Clara, he didn't look away in shame this time. He gave a very small, respectful nod in acknowledgement of the world she had built and the place he now occupied within it. He wasn't a friend, and he might never be, but he was no longer an enemy. He was just a member of the community. Later that night, as the event was winding down, Clara went to the small cafe on the ground floor to help the staff clean up. She liked the manual labor. It kept her grounded. While she was stacking some trays, she noticed a woman sitting alone at a small table in the back. The woman was wearing a simple scarf and a worn wool coat. It was Jolene. Jolene wasn't looking at anyone. She was looking at a small ceramic bowl on the table in front of her, something one of the students had made. She looked lonely, but she didn't look bitter. Clara hesitated for a moment, then walked over. She didn't say anything at first. She just sat down in the chair opposite her. Jolene looked up, her eyes widening slightly. She looked like she wanted to say something sharp, something to protect her pride, but the words didn't come. Instead, she let out a long, shaky sigh. "My father lost the house last month," Jolene said, her voice barely a whisper. "The one on the hill. The one I used to brag about." "I'm sorry to hear that," Clara said, and she realized she actually meant it. She didn't feel joy in Jolene's misfortune. She just felt the heavy reality of how much energy Jolene had spent building a life on a foundation of sand. "I used to think that house was who I was," Jolene continued, her eyes fixed on the ceramic bowl. "I thought if I had the best clothes and the best car and the most power, I would never have to feel like this. I would never have to feel small." "We all feel small sometimes, Jolene," Clara said. "The difference is what we do with that feeling. You used it to try and make others smaller. I used it to try and make myself bigger." Jolene looked at Clara, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "I was so mean to you. I don't even know why anymore. It felt like a game back then, a way to stay at the top. I never stopped to think about what was happening to the people at the bottom." "I know," Clara said. "I don't expect you to forgive me," Jolene said, stood up and wrapped her coat tighter around her. "I just wanted to come here and see it. I wanted to see if what people were saying was true. About this place, and..." Clara asked. "It's beautiful," Jolene said. She turned to leave, then stopped. "I'm working at the library now, part-time. It's quiet. I think I like the quiet," as Jolene walked out into the snowy night. Clara realized that the tables hadn't just turned, they had been set for a new kind of future. The revenge she had once imagined as a teenager, Jolene begging for mercy, wasn't what had happened. Instead, something better had occurred. Growth Clara walked out onto the balcony of the center. The snow was still falling, silent and steady, She looked down at the town of Oak Ridge. She saw the lights of the library where Jolene would be working. She saw the hardware store where Toby found his honest living. She saw the houses of the children, who now had a place to dream. She realized that her true success wasn't the buildings she had designed in the city, or the money in her bank account, or the look on the bullies' faces at the reunion. Her true success was that she had taken the broken pieces of her past and used them to build a shelter for everyone else. The girl who used to hide in the library was gone. In her place was a woman who had built the library. She was no longer a victim of her history. She was the architect of her own life. Clara looked up at the winter sky, a smile playing on her lips. She felt the cold air on her face and the warmth of the building behind her. She was Clara. She was an artist. She was a builder. And finally, she was free. The story of the girl from Oak Ridge was finally complete. And for the first time in 10 years, she didn't have to look back to know exactly where she was going.